This is Erhai Lake, the mother lake for Dali people. For years, the water has been breeding the people living by the lakeside.
What if a country didn't just try to save a dying lake, but wiped out towns, shut down businesses, and changed its laws overnight to make it happen?
But at the same time, human activities also take a toll on the water quality.
In southwest China, a once-loved lake was drowning in trash and overrun by tourists.
A constant stream of visitors also added to the increased risk of pollution.
Then came one of the toughest cleanups the world has ever seen. Over 40,000 tons of waste were removed from the lake, and what happened next blew scientists away.
So these volunteers have been sent out twice a week to clear out the waste from the water.
This isn't made up. It really happened, and the true story is even deeper and more shocking than you can imagine. The untold story of Erhai. In the highlands of China's Yunnan province, tucked between the snow-capped Kangshan Mountains and the old city of Dali, there's a lake so breathtaking locals call it the Plateau Pearl. Its real name is Erhai, meaning ear-shaped sea, and it stretches about 24.9 miles from north to south, reaching up to 4.97 miles wide. That's 96.5 square miles of fresh, shimmering water, sitting more than 6,400 feet above sea level. That's higher than many of Europe's tallest peaks. And beneath its surface, there's almost 3.3 billion cubic yards of water. For centuries, Erhai Lake didn't just sit there quietly, it sustained life, culture, and deep tradition. To the Bai people, who've lived here since the days of the 8th century Nanzhao Kingdom, Erhai isn't just a lake, it's Mother Lake. Every fourth lunar month, entire villages gather for the Rao Sanling pilgrimage. For 3 days, they walk from temple to temple around the lake, beating drums, ringing silver bells, and wearing traditional indigo robes. They do it to thank the spirits for the calm waves and the fish that fill their nets. And when the late summer monsoon breaks, they celebrate the Kaihai festival. At dawn, fishermen slip out across the glassy water in wooden boats, releasing sleek black cormorants. Brass rings around the birds' necks keep them from swallowing their catch, fat, silvery carp meant for shared family feasts. Before the crowds and construction came, Erhai was bursting with life. Scientists documented 23 native fish species here, 8 of them found nowhere else on Earth. That includes the broad-finned Cyprinus barbatus and the darting Zacco thaliensis. Shallow parts of the lake were filled with Otelia acuminata, white-petaled lilies that kept the water clean and gave shelter to tiny shrimp. Every winter, red-billed gulls flew in from the frozen plains of Siberia, tens of thousands of them, filling the sky and circling above Dali's 3 pagodas like clockwork. People used to say you could drop a coin 13 feet deep and still see it glint. And on quiet nights, the pagoda's reflections were so clear you could count the edges of each tier. With the mountains to the west, rice fields rolling out to the east, and the Yangtze River carrying its waters south to the Mekong, Erhai once felt untouchable and eternal. But even the strongest mothers can break when pushed too far, and what came next pushed Erhai to the edge. Erhai's dark turn. In the early 2000s, Dali was still one of China's best-kept secrets. A few travelers wandered in, charmed by cobbled alleys, whitewashed courtyards, and a lake that shimmered like jade under the Yunnan sun. But it didn't stay quiet for long. China's rising middle class was hungry for beauty, and once word got out, Dali exploded. In 2005, the region recorded just over 4 million visitor entries. By 2010, that number had more than doubled, and by 2016, it had soared to nearly 40 million. That's like squeezing the entire population of California into one small prefecture every single year. And with it came money, lots of it. Tourist spending ballooned past 24 billion yuan, or about $3.5 billion US dollars. It changed everything. Villages that used to go silent after sunset suddenly buzzed with neon lights, guitar music, and late-night rooftop parties. No place changed faster than Shuanglang, a small fishing village on Erhai's eastern shore. Within a few years, it was almost unrecognizable. Researchers later counted close to 1,800 guest houses packed into that tiny township. And most weren't built with permits or plumbing or any plan for waste. Many owners, rushing to cash in, just drilled pipes through their floors and ran them straight toward Erhai Lake. Rice paddies vanished. In their place came boutique hotels with infinity pools lined up perfectly for sunset selfies. The phrase "live slow in Dali" was everywhere, etched into cafe signs, printed on mugs, and stitched onto throw pillows. But behind that dreamy aesthetic, construction never slowed. New buildings rose around the clock, and so did the trash. Old treatment systems built back in the 90s were completely overwhelmed. According to provincial audits, by 2015, the combined weight of daily waste from tourists and residents had crossed 661 short tons. That included plastic takeaway boxes, straws, spoiled food, and even broken selfie sticks. Yet city trucks could only collect about half of it. The rest found their way into Erhai Lake. Lakeside cafes dumped greasy water into storm drains. In Jiaguan Township, one reporter followed a hidden pipe and found warm, soapy hotel runoff, bubbling into a reed bed that fed straight into the lake. Scientists saw the shift first in the data. In the summer of 2013, chlorophyll A levels spiked, clear proof that algae were beginning to bloom. Then, satellite images from September revealed streaks of milky turquoise curling across the lake's surface. By 2016, it was undeniable. Whole bays turned pea green. Fishing nets dragged up clumps of algae so thick that dryers jammed trying to peel it off. Field teams from Yunnan University discovered phosphate levels in some feeder streams had doubled beyond the safe limit. In deeper zones, oxygen had dropped so low that fish were surfacing, gasping at dawn. Locals began adapting, but not by choice. Fishermen from the Bai ethnic group, who had lived off the lake for generations, found their nets coming up empty. So they pivoted. They swapped out their tackle for paddleboards and boat tours. One retired fisherman, Yang Jianqing, remembered catching 55 pounds of silverfish on a single morning in 2002. By 2015, his best haul of the season didn't even hit 4 pounds. So he turned his front yard into a hostel, 7 rooms, a rooftop bar, and a view that still looked perfect on social media. Tourists didn't see the problem. The water still sparkled in drone footage, shot, of course, during golden hour. Bloggers posted filtered photos and raved about the emerald clarity. They didn't notice that the lake looked clean only after heavy rains briefly diluted the scum. Beneath the surface, transparency in parts of the southern basin had dropped to less than 3.3 feet. Elders in Wei's village remembered seeing all the way to the stones at the bottom, 9.9 feet down. But now, even standing ankle deep, you couldn't see your toes. The biological damage was mounting. Native golden line barbels were vanishing. Scientists measured a 60% crash in their population. White-petaled Atelia beds, once thick along the shoreline, were nearly gone in some areas. The lake's chemistry was shifting fast. Officials weren't blind to it. Back in 2011, Beijing's Ministry of Environmental Protection had already listed Erhai as a high-risk water body. But every time someone proposed tighter discharge rules, they hit a wall of resistance, especially from guesthouse owners and real estate developers riding the wave of profit. Local planners handed out glossy brochures about eco-toilets and reed bed filters, but few of those projects made it past the planning stage. Meanwhile, new hostel permits kept getting stamped and approved. Underneath the buzz, pressure was building. A leaked memo from the Dali Environmental Bureau, later quoted in regional media, warned that the lake's decline could threaten long-term social stability. But the timing was never right. The spring festival was coming. Hotels were booked solid. No one wanted to take the heat for killing a booming industry. And so the buses kept coming. Guest houses stayed open. Kitchen drains kept gurgling. And Erhai, once called the Mother Lake, held on in silence. No one realized how close she was to the edge. But the breaking point was just around the corner. The Great Erhai Purge. On the first morning of March 2017, everything changed. Dali woke up to the sharp crack of padlocks snapping shut and police tape stretching across doors. Without warning, electricity to lakeside cafes, bars, and guest houses was cut. By midday, more than 2,400 businesses were ordered closed, instantly, without exceptions, without room to argue. Crews in orange vests moved fast, nailing signs that read, "Protect Erhai voluntarily closed" onto shop fronts. By nightfall, bulldozers were already rolling along the lakeside road. Within 3 weeks, 1,806 buildings located within 49 feet of the water had been flattened. Families in the zone were paid to relocate, many leaving behind homes they had lived in for decades, still trying to process how fast it had all happened. What outsiders saw as a sudden crackdown was actually part of something bigger, a sweeping environmental offensive known locally as the 7 Big Actions. The rules were brutal and left no room for loopholes. The first step was known as the Too Forbidden. That meant any guest house or restaurant built illegally near a tributary or the shoreline was permanently shut down. No negotiation. Then came the Too Pollutants. Septic tanks, some the size of rice cookers, were installed in village yards. Trash had to be dumped in official depots, or owners faced instant fines. Officials walked from door to door checking for leaking gray water, and even backyard pit toilets were connected to newly built pipes. On surrounding farmland, high fertilizer garlic and backyard pig pens were suddenly banned, and drones scanned fields from above, looking for unauthorized wells that could lower groundwater levels and threaten the balance of Erhai Lake. While new rules tightened on land, an all-out cleanup began on water. Barges and amphibious trucks moved across the lake like a small army. Over the course of one summer, they pulled out more than 40,000 tons of waste. Everything from plastic bags and rotting algae to sunken shopping carts, and sludge so black with phosphorus it reeked of sulfur. Some dredger operators said the bottom muck looked like sulfur pudding. It had been rotting for years without oxygen. When it reached open air, gas bubbles popped like something was decomposing right in front of them. Every load was hauled to drying fields outside the city. From there, it went straight to treatment centers or brick kilns where it could be burned safely. Meanwhile, engineers were racing to stop the problem at its source. Beneath the ground, they laid out an underground pipe network like a moat, designed to catch every drop of wastewater before it touched Erhai again. This sewage ring, built through a public-private partnership, stretched 146 miles and connected to 17 pumping stations. Those stations carried sewage uphill, yes, uphill, to 6 modern treatment plants scattered around the region. Combined, those facilities could treat more than 70,630 cubic yards of wastewater a day, roughly enough to fill 21 Olympic swimming pools. The entire build cost about $435 million. And the instructions were crystal clear. Not one drop of untreated sewage must ever reach the lake again. Enforcement was just as aggressive as the cleanup. Patrol boats scanned the lake daily, searching for new illegal pipes. Drones hovered over farmland at night, watching for chemical runoff. Any business caught violating the new waste rules didn't just get a warning, it got a red tag and a date with the demolition crew. By the end of 2018, city inspectors proudly claimed that 96% of all wastewater across Dali was reaching a treatment plant before morning. Around the lake, red and white banners quoting President Xi Jinping's 2015 pledge were impossible to miss. Lucid waters and lush mountains are invaluable assets. The message was loud and clear. This wasn't just a local fix. It had the full weight of Beijing behind it. Yet the turnaround wasn't driven by officials alone. What truly kept the momentum alive was the thousands of volunteers who stepped in when it mattered most. In October 2019, the Ministry of Water Resources and People's Daily launched a campaign called Care for Rivers and Lakes, Protect Mother Erhai. It wasn't just a slogan. Local shopkeepers, farmers, retirees, and school children signed up to become shoreline guardians. Clad in blue vests and straw hats, these volunteers started their days at dawn, scooping up litter, reporting illegal pipes, and logging bird sightings into a public app that streamed live data to county officials. Even before that, in December 2018, 170 international students from 30 countries flew into Dali for a week to help remove plastic debris and plant willow cuttings along 1.24 miles of damaged shoreline. Many of them came back the next year, this time paying out of pocket just to be part of it again. Local stories spread like wildfire. One Bai farmer, Li Chunxi, was first hired in 2016 as a manure collector. But she didn't stop there. She rallied her neighbors to run weekend bucket brigades, hauling livestock waste to a village biogas digester instead of letting it flow toward the lake. Her story made it into the Yunnan Daily and inspired other villages to do the same. By the spring of 2021, more than 11,000 volunteers had officially registered as Erhai Guardians. Some were students building floating reed islands out of bamboo. Others were cyclists who rode the entire shoreline, looking for signs of trouble. Every one of them played a role in giving the lake a second chance. From the outside, the transformation felt unreal. In just under 2 years, Erhai Lake went from chaotic and overcrowded to quiet and heavily protected. The shoreline looked bare, cleared of pipes, livestock pens, cement patios, and beach bars. But recovery didn't come instantly. The lake still looked bruised. Drag marks from dredging stretched through the shallows. Visibility was still low in many areas. People began to ask tough questions. Was all this worth it? Would the lake bounce back? Or was this just too little, too late? Erhai's wild comeback. By the start of 2018, the bulldozers had gone quiet, but the real transformation around Erhai Lake was just beginning. This time, the work wasn't loud. It was quiet, precise, and driven by science. All across the lake's restored wetlands, 265 solar-powered sensors were tucked into reed beds, each one silently monitoring oxygen levels, ammonia, and chlorophyll every 15 minutes. The data flowed in real time to a control center in Xiaguan, where scientists could now predict problems before they even appeared. If nutrient levels spiked or algae threatened to bloom, they could respond instantly, dispatching dredgers, adjusting flow rates, or shutting floodgates before the damage spread. What they started to see surprised even them. For the first time in years, the green signals that marked harmful algal blooms were dropping. And they kept dropping, week after week. Most of the credit went to the wetlands. Along an 80.15-mile ecological corridor, engineers had torn out concrete banks and replaced them with life. Reeds, bulrush, and willow that soaked up nitrates and filtered the water naturally. These green buffers didn't just look pretty, they worked. By late 2019, satellite images began picking up streaks of pale blue water in places that had once been brown and murky. The Ministry of Ecology and Environment took note, officially grading Erhai as excellent 3 years in a row: 2020, 2021, and 2022. Water clarity hit 7.5 feet, the highest level recorded in nearly 20 years. The infrastructure side told the same story. Dali's treatment system had grown into a beast of its own. 19 full plants, more than 2,500 miles of buried pipe, and 120,000 septic tanks now fed the grid. Over 96% of every flush, every shower, every kitchen drain across the basin was being processed before sunrise. Even the treated water was recycled, pumped uphill to mountain villages for irrigation, closing the loop and reducing waste. And nature didn't wait long to respond. In the spring of 2025, botanist Kong Hainan stood in a skiff near Was village and saw something no one had seen in 20 years. Delicate white petals blooming beneath the surface. Otelia acuminata, Erhai's native water lily, was back. His team had seeded about 494 acres with lab-grown plants. But the real shock came when more lilies began sprouting on their own, growing wild once the light could finally reach the lakebed again. Soon after, schools of golden line barbel followed. Red-billed gulls returned a full month early, wheeling overhead. their reflections sharp enough to photograph straight off the water. No filters, no tricks. These weren't just scientific wins, they changed the way people lived. Shuanglang, the lakeside village that once crammed nearly 1,800 guest houses onto every ledge and alley, reopened under strict rules. No more free-for-all. Only businesses with built-in high-grade wastewater treatment systems were allowed to operate. Daily visitor numbers were capped at 15,000 during peak seasons. At first, many feared the rules would scare people away. But something different happened. The tourists who came now weren't chasing bar crawls. They came for bird-watching, cycling, and research. Room prices went up. So did occupancy. It turns out clean water doesn't just heal the environment, it boosts the economy too. Farmers too felt the shift, right down to their soil. Those old garlic fields, which had been major sources of fertilizer runoff, began to disappear. In their place came blueberries and cherries, crops that required far fewer chemicals. County records showed over 3,000 small plots were consolidated into modern agricultural cooperatives. Farmers who once picked garlic by hand now earned stable wages tending orchards, while their produce, now stamped with labels like "Grown in Erhai Protection Zone," sold at a premium in Kunming's city markets. Suddenly, the same farmers who once resisted the environmental crackdown were proudly defending it. Beyond Yunnan, Erhai was becoming something else entirely, a model. Environmental teams from Vietnam's Red River Delta, India's Vembanad wetlands, and Kenya's Lake Naivasha began joining virtual tours of the Zheguan Command Center. They watched in real time as Chinese planners used data dashboards to guide every dredge pass and wetland transplant. Policy experts began calling it the pipeline plus wetland model, a blend of high-tech sewage control and large-scale nature restoration backed by serious government investment and relentless boots-on-the-ground enforcement. Tourism boards jumped on the momentum. Now ads on China's high-speed trains feature cyclists rolling along lakeside boardwalks, QR codes floating next to their wheels. Scan one and you get live water quality readings, actual proof that the water beneath your bike is cleaner than most bottled springs. A 2024 visitor survey by Dali University revealed that 9 out of 10 tourists had heard of the lake's recovery before they even arrived. 3 out of 4 said it was the reason they came. But even success came with stress tests. In early 2022, a winter drought dropped the lake by 1.64 feet. Nutrient levels began concentrating, and the threat of new blooms loomed. Officials responded immediately, cutting off farm runoff valves in real time and halting all dredging to avoid stirring up sediment. The bloom never came. It was the first true challenge to the system, and it passed. Still, not everyone is fully convinced. Critics say the campaign cost too much, 18 billion yuan by official estimates, and warn that the lake is still fragile, needing 4 years to fully recycle its water. But even those skeptics admit that Erhai dodged the fate of Dianchi Lake near Kunming, which slipped into worse than grade 5 status and hasn't recovered since. For locals, the recovery is more than data. It shows up in small personal moments. Kids wading knee-deep, spotting tiny shrimp flicking between lily stems. Fisherman Yang Jianqing, who once gave up fishing to run a rooftop bar, now keeps a single boat for sunrise tours. On calm mornings, he lowers a glass tube into the lake and lets guests see it for themselves. 6.6 feet of clarity, no algae, no sludge. His daughter, now a teenager, was born the year the algae first turned the water brown. She once thought her grandfather's stories of clear water were just nostalgia. Now, she knows they were real. Erhai, once a warning, is now a case study. And what it teaches is simple. When a lake is given relentless attention, smart tools, and time to breathe, it doesn't just survive. It comes back clearer, stronger, and more alive than anyone thought possible. As Erhai bloomed back to life, another lake just down the road was still struggling to breathe. Dianchi, the lake that couldn't bounce back. Dianchi Lake stretches like a giant crescent just south of Kunming, the capital of Yunnan Province. Locals once called it the Lake of Brightness, and back in the early 1980s, it lived up to that name. People remember how the water reflected the peaks around it so clearly it felt like a second sky. It was the largest freshwater lake in the province, covering over 116 square miles, and it played a central role in the life of the city. But then Kunming exploded. The city's rapid growth brought factories to the lakeshore and waves of new suburbs. Untreated sewage flowed straight into 54 rivers that fed the lake, and agricultural runoff from upstream paddies pushed nutrients into the water far faster than it could flush them out. By the mid-1990s, the lake had changed completely. Levels of nitrogen and phosphorus had jumped more than tenfold. Microscopic algae, especially cyanobacteria, multiplied at terrifying rates, reaching concentrations of 10 to the 7th, sometimes even 10 to the 8th cells per liter. Dianchi turned thick and green. Locals started calling it green soup. In 2003, a canoe regatta had to be canceled because the stench rolling off the water was so strong it chased athletes away. Fishermen who had relied on the lake for generations packed up their nets and moved on to smaller reservoirs. In 1996, Beijing named Dianchi a key national lake and poured billions of yuan into restoration efforts. But it was already late. Even after years of intervention, the northern half of Dianchi still measured worse than Category 5 by 2010, the very bottom of China's water quality scale. For comparison, Erhai Lake never dropped below Category 4. Part of the difference came down to speed. Erhai's recovery started early and hard. Dianchi, on the other hand, had to face its crisis while still receiving wastewater from more than 8 million urban residents. And its water takes roughly 8 years to fully renew, 4 times longer than Erhai, so any damage lingers like ink in still water. The first big fix came with a massive underground sewer, over 124 miles long, along with 7 wastewater treatment plants. But that alone didn't move the needle. So in 2013, officials tried another approach. Clean water from the Nyulan River was piped into the lake, over 784 million cubic yards every year, enough to raise the water level by about 1.6 feet during dry spells. At the same time, 216 heavily polluting factories were shut down or relocated. Shoreline fish pens were banned, and more than 12,355 acres of wetlands were restored to filter nutrients. Progress came, but painfully slowly. Satellite data from the past 30 years showed blooms peaking in 2012, shrinking slightly after 2018, and swelling again in 2022 during a harsh drought. That year, half the lake's surface was ringed with fluorescent green scum. Still, the data isn't all bad. A 2024 report showed that dissolved phosphate had dropped by nearly 40% since 2015. Transparency in the southern bay improved from about 7.9 inches to nearly 2.6 feet. But the northern bay remains one of the worst eutrophic zones in all of China. For Erhai's lake managers, Dianchi became a cautionary tale. While Erhai's dashboard shows algae levels dropping steadily, Dianchi's monitors still flash red every summer. One bad rainstorm or a broken sewage valve, and everything can slip backwards. Kunming's city government now publishes live chlorophyll maps online, mimicking Erhai's real-time monitoring system. They've also raised fines, 10,000 yuan for every illegal discharge, triple the old rate. It's a sign of how seriously they now take it. Locals see the changes in quiet moments. In Kunyang Township, lotus vendors returned to the lake's edge last year for the first time in years. The broad leaves had finally reclaimed over 740 acres of shoreline. Birdwatchers spotted tufted ducks wintering in the haiku wetlands, a species that hadn't been seen there in a decade. But recovery is far from complete. Many fishermen still use portable aerators to keep carp alive in their boats. Oxygen levels can still crash without warning, killing fish overnight. As of today, Dianchi's central and southern waters sit between categories 3 and 4. It's a big step up from the toxic depths of its past, but still far from stable. Kunming officials say it could take another 10 years before the lake can handle summer rains without tipping into bloom. And they're clear about the lesson. Once a lake crosses a certain threshold of pollution, turning it around is a long, expensive climb. That lesson is why Erhai's managers now enforce tougher patrols, stricter permits, and quicker interventions. Because they've seen what happens when action comes too late. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.